In this module, we'll build a rudimentary WhatsApp clone. I'll take a very different path when compared to previous cloned applications here. We'll talk about that and these things in the next few slides. The first thing I'd like to go into is that this clone isn't pixel perfect. It's a fast and dirty clone. I'll focus only on the basic text sending functionality and won't go into nearly as much as detail as I did in the other clones. Frankly, it's not necessary. The functionality is simple once you understand the Facebook clone. I skipped a lot of the core features, mostly due to time, but also because these features are covered in the Facebook clone and re-implementing them for yet another clone would have been redundant. I'll only focus on these forms. I won't implement everything here either. Since we already implemented SMS verification in the Facebook clone, I'll use the SMS activation library. However, I'll use server-side authentication for that library for extra security. WhatsApp doesn't use passwords. I considered using the phone number as the ID, which seems to be what they are doing. I ended up using a regular ID though. There is an authorization token which I will discuss later. Like other clones, I'll use Spring Boot again. That makes this familiar and allows me to grab some code from the other projects. The database will be MySQL again for the same reason. I'll store data as JSON locally instead of SQLite. This makes it easy to use and debug the code. That might be something worth changing if you are building this for scale. I'm still using web services for most of the functionality. They are still easier to work with than WebSockets. However, messaging is the ideal use case for WebSockets, and I'm using it for that exact purpose. When the WebSocket is closed, which would happen if the app isn't running or is minimized, I use push. Push is used strictly as a visual medium to notify the user of a new message. When sending and receiving data in WebSockets, I use JSON. In the past, I used a binary WebSocket, and I wanted to show how this approach works as well. So let's start by creating the Spring Boot project for the server. I'm assuming you went through the previous modules, and I won't repeat myself too much. You can use the Spring Boot initializer, which I used to create this POM file. I just defined a new project with this package for Java 8. We'll use JPA to communicate with the MySQL database. We use Jersey for POJO JSON serialization. The security package allows us to encrypt credentials into the database. It has a lot of other features, but they aren't as useful for us. We need web services support too, and WebSockets to implement the for communication protocol. The underlying database is MySQL, so we need the right drivers for that. And finally, we need the server-side Twilio library to implement SMS support on the server. This will be used for the activation code functionality. Next, we need to create the client application, which I create as WhatsApp clone. I use the default native and barebones settings in the IDE. I pick the com codename1.whatsapp package, nothing special. Next, we'll go into the classes that implement the client functionality.